If yoga doesn't feel like it's working anymore, if your practice just doesn't feel the same, if you have more aches and pains, you're getting less from it, maybe you even need recovery time after it. It's not just you, nothing's wrong. Your body is changing and your practice needs to change too. Today, I'll share 5 changes to making your practice, especially if you're over 40 and want to practice for decades to come. Hi, I'm Allison Star. I've been practicing yoga for over 20 years, teaching for over 18, and I've helped hundreds of clients, thousands of students navigate the changes in their body with their moving and breathing. In my mid-30s, my body started to tell the tale of aging, especially in my joints, and I had to completely evolve my practice. In the beginning, I was a little frustrated and discouraged, but this shift has actually made me appreciate my practice more, because I know my practice can sustain me for decades to come. Here are the 5 changes I recommend you make when you're over 40 or your body's telling you need to practice differently. 1, stop chasing sensation, stretch, and poses. 2, build strength and stability. 3, develop your breathing. 4, know your nervous system. 5, expand your practice. Stay with me. For each one, I'm going to give you stories, science, and simple action steps. Number 1, stop chasing sensation, stretch, and poses. I started my yoga journey in an alignment-based system because I had a lot of sports-induced injuries. Over time, my sports mentality took over and I started practicing more and more aggressively, almost competitively with myself. In my early 30s, I could do crazy things like put my feet behind my head, touch my head to my feet in a back bend, lots of arm balances, handstands, you name it, I did it. In my mid-30s, my joints started to tell the tale, especially my elbows. I wanted to ignore it, but I couldn't because I did a photo shoot in my mid-30s, and the difference between my body in my early 30s and my mid-30s was obvious. A lot of my sports-related injuries were also starting to resurface, especially instability in my SI joint that would lead to my low back going out regularly. And this is a dirty little secret of the yoga industry that many teachers end up in pain with injuries, even surgeries, because of the push for poses and extreme flexibility. I didn't know it at the time, but my hormones were playing a major part in the changes in my body. I was entering perimenopause. With the decline in estrogen, there's more inflammatory markers, often more cortisol too, and this can lead to more aches and pains as well as joint laxity and instability. So when you start to experience more aches and pains, old injuries resurfacing, this is a clear signal that your practice needs to shift. And I totally understand if you resist this. I did too. See, there's a drive in the Western mind and modern yoga culture for stretch, for sensation, for the performance of poses, but you really have to decide what you're practicing for. There are 2 tracks. One is for accomplishment, where yoga is almost like an extreme sport. The other is for health and longevity, and then you're engaging with the practice much differently. So ask yourself, what track are you on? Because it will influence the outcome. And if you want health and longevity, then we're on to point number 2. Focus on strength and stability. So in my mid-30s, I noticed the joint laxity. In my late 30s, the loss of muscle mass was becoming obvious. Now, a part of me liked this because I've always been athletic and had a lot of muscle. With the decrease in muscle mass, I was finally skinny. And I know this is a little sick and sad, and I know many of you wrestle with this too, so I will say it so you don't have to. So here's the science. After 30, women lose about 3 to 8% of their muscle mass per decade. Plus, by age 50, women can lose up to 20% of their bone density if they're not doing resistance training. So you've got a loss of muscle mass, a loss of bone density, looser ligaments. This is a recipe for injury unless you do something different. I knew I needed strength training, but I hated the gym. I hated everything about it. The people, the smell, the repetitive exercise, the clunky movements. So I started doing strength training on my mat. I'd weave it into yoga movements. I added resistance bands. I eventually added weight. But perhaps most importantly, I found a way to make it feel like yoga. This has totally transformed my body, but it took a massive shift in my perspective. I had to let go of dozens of poses, ways of moving and breathing and being, and I had to shift and focus on strength and stability. And that came from muscles and bones, absolutely, but also from my breathing. And that takes us to point number 3, develop your breathing. Your breathing is your internal strength system. When it generates intra-abdominal pressure, your core is solid and strong, like a taut drum rather than a floppy balloon. And your movements are smooth and fluid, like a wheel that's turning well instead of a clunky, flat tire. In my mid-30s, I did a series of one-on-one sessions with my teacher to help me with my low back pain. My SI joint had become so unstable, my low back was going out regularly. I was laying down to put my pants on more times than I care to admit. My sciatica could be so bad that every step I took felt like I was getting shocked down my right leg. I was in his office trying so hard. He had me doing this and that and up and down and here and there, trying to figure out where the instability was coming from and what would actually help it. And I was trying so hard, I was sweating profusely, like the type of nervous sweat where it's coming out of every pore. Finally, he said, stop. Right there. So I stopped, very thankful, and stood, and he put his hand on my lower back by my lower ribs and he said, breathe here. And then he said again, and again, and again. And then he said, when you're breathing well, your alignment is fine. And I could feel it. It took me a while to implement. I had to go very slow. I had to let go of a lot. But it changed everything about my low back and it got me out of pain. When you develop your breathing, amazing things can happen, near miracles, because your breathing influences every system in your body. It will improve your circulation, your digestion, your heart, your lungs. It will help your sleep and your hormones and your stress levels and your nervous system and your mood. So developing your breathing is much bigger than just breathing. And it will give you the stability from the core of your body that you've been seeking. In studies on functional breathing, it is shown to influence everything from your abdominal muscles to your pelvic floor, all the way down to your ankles and your feet. It is probably the only thing that can bring whole body systemic stability and strength. And the key to developing your breathing is getting the respiratory diaphragm and the pelvic floor diaphragm stacked. So then they talk, they move in a rhythm of relationship, and that generates intra-abdominal pressure, that steady, still core. Now, you cannot do intra-abdominal pressure, you cannot make it happen. You set up the circumstances for it to occur naturally. Those circumstances include aligning the rib cage and the pelvis so respiratory diaphragm, pelvic floor can do that dance. Especially if you've practiced yoga for a long time, you are likely to have your ribs forward and your butt back. So then the rib cage and the pelvis are not aligned. So respiratory diaphragm and pelvic floor diaphragm cannot talk. So the first order of business is anchor the pelvis from the sitting bones and the hamstrings, and then draw the front ribs in and down so you get stacked. Practice that. Then drive your breathing from your diaphragm and watch what happens. This will give you strength everywhere, and your breathing will balance the branches of your nervous system, which takes us to point number 4, know your nervous system. With perimenopause and menopause, we see rates of anxiety and depression and burnout skyrocket. With the changes in your hormones, cortisol and inflammation can also go off the charts. To make matters worse, sleep problems tend to be rampant. So all of a sudden, we have a perfect storm for an angry, crazy lady. Breathing will directly influence your autonomic nervous system. It will also give you more self-awareness so you can get to know your nervous system. And I encourage you to find daily diagnostics, tasks you do on a regular basis that will give you a window into the state of your nervous system. For example, I can tell everything I need to know about my nervous system by how I'm doing the dishes. If I'm scrubbing the dishes in a frenzy with a little bit of fervor behind it, I know I am in a sympathetic state. If I'm lamenting the never-ending dishes and in a state of low-grade despair, then I know I'm in a dorsal vagal state, and I'm probably pretty close to overwhelm or shutdown. If I'm happy to do the dishes, easy breezy, no big thing, then I know I'm in the ventral vagal pathway. What are the daily activities you do where you can get to know your nervous system? Maybe it's how you're driving on your commute to work. Maybe it's your patience when you're making meals for your kids. Maybe it's the activity you do when you get home from your day. Whatever it is, find ways to self-assess your nervous system, because awareness is the change. It's only when you're willing to look and truly see and be with what is that you can start to make a shift. And when you're looking and seeing and connecting and making changes, you are starting to practice everywhere, which takes us to point number 5, expand your practice. In the West, yoga has really gotten pigeonholed to mean postures and exercise. But the tradition saw it as something much bigger, a way of living and being in the world. To help students expand their practice and see connection and integration everywhere, we developed a tool called the Practice Compass, and it has 4 main points: movement, stillness, resilience, and reflection. And you want to stretch your ability to create connection into all of those arenas. For example, can you find connection and integration like yoga in all the movement practices you do? Strength training, Pilates, running, cycling, hiking. Especially in our modern digital age, we need stillness practices. We need to sit and be with ourselves. And that may be meditation or a breathing practice. Even a walk in the wood can be a meditative stillness, silence, solitude practice. Resilience practices are when you intentionally add a stressor to expand your capacity. This could be cold plunge, sauna, a difficult activity. It could even be a challenge you give yourself at work. The key with resilience practices is learning to manage the dose of stress and even use stress to expand your capacity and fine-tune your relationship with your nervous system. Reflection practices are things like journaling, but also things like check-in. We do check-in at the beginning of each class, so students are processing in real time. Reflection practices allow us to live in the gain rather than the gap. This is a term from Benjamin Hardy. Most of us measure ourselves in the gap. We see where we want to go, and we're measuring the distance, how long it's going to take, what we're not doing or not accomplishing yet. So it puts us in a state of lack. When you measure in the gain, you're looking at how far you've come, all that you've gotten, all that you've learned, all the ways that you've grown. When we reflect, we train our brains to look for the gain. When students expand their practice and their definition of yoga, they feel infinitely more satisfied by what they're doing, and they're creating that sense of yoga, that sense of connection in everything they do, everywhere they are, everyone they're interacting with. It is very, very powerful. And again, the Practice Compass is to give you some different directions to stretch your practice and your perspective into. Again, stretch it into every movement modality you have. Find some opportunities to practice silence and stillness. Challenge yourself appropriately. Build your resilience, even your anti-fragility. And don't forget about reflection, because that allows you to look for the gain and see growth and progress rather than live in the lack and the gap. So those are your 5 shifts. Stop chasing stretch, sensation, and poses. Start building strength and stability. Develop your breathing. Know your nervous system and expand your practice. Your practice can support you your whole life, but often it needs to change to support the changes in your body. Sometimes the ego doesn't like that. Mine still wishes I was 25, but shifting my practice has been so rewarding. It has given me more self-knowledge, self-compassion, and a sense of power and agency in my own aging journey. I'd love to hear about shifts you've made in your practice as you've aged. Drop them in the comments below. If you want to practice evolved yoga with me, I'm leading a day-long retreat at Padma in Fairfax, California on November 9th. If you want one-on-one mentoring to evolve your practice, check out Asana Strong. And if you love this, please share with a friend because how we practice after 40 matters.